The real Tea Party begins here, reclaiming our sovereignty with publicly owned banks, based on The Web of Debt by Ellen Brown, with additional materials by the Public Banking Forum, adapted and narrated by Bob Bowes. The Boston Tea Party is often characterized as the catalyzing event for the American War of Independence from Great Britain. It is usually described in history books as a complaint against the British import tax on tea, but the underlying cause of a series of colonial uprisings was the British government's attempt to prevent the colonists from issuing their own money. In 1751, King George II enacted a ban on the issue of new paper money, which was continued by his son, King George III, in 1760. Benjamin Franklin went to London to petition Parliament to lift the ban. Instead, the private banking interests that control British currency leaned on Parliament to pass an even more draconian measure that banned the issuance of currency in the colonies. As a result, the money supply quickly shrank, leaving widespread unemployment, hunger, and poverty in its wake. Meanwhile, King George III was looking for a way to recoup his war costs after the expensive French and Indian War, as well as to reassert control over the increasingly unruly colonies. He imposed a series of taxes that had to be paid either in gold or silver, or in the supposedly gold-backed paper money of the Bank of England. The colonists, lacking this form of money, had to borrow from the British bankers, putting them further in debt and putting their homes and farms in jeopardy. When the outraged colonists protested, the taxes were retracted, except for a duty on tea, a demonstration of Parliament's ability and right to tax the colonies in the currency of the motherland. In 1773, the colonists responded by dressing up as Native Americans and dumping the cargo of 3 tea ships into Boston Harbor, the infamous act of rebellion known as the Boston Tea Party. The colonists persisted in their rebellion, forming revolutionary assemblies that ignored the ban and issued their own paper money. The first act of the Continental Congress was to issue its own paper scrip, popularly called the Continental. As the colonists and the mother country marched down the road to war, British bankers counterattacked by issuing massive amounts of counterfeit Continentals, eventually doubling the money supply. They also used speculation to drive down the value of the Continental. British gold and silver coins were still in circulation, and the Continental Congress did not yet have the power to declare their scrip the sole currency. By the end of the war, the Continental was so devalued that the Founding Fathers became completely disillusioned with it. They could not agree on whether to let Congress issue paper money, so they simply left it out of the Constitution. The Constitution says only that Congress shall have the power to coin money. The power to print paper money was not mentioned. The distrust of state-issued currency among those who did not understand the counterfeiting and speculative maneuvers of the British bankers provided fertile ground for Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, to urge the formation of the first Bank of the United States. The bank wound up being controlled by the same private foreign banking interests that had opposed colonial currency in the first place. Hamilton's first U.S. bank was modeled on the privately owned Bank of England, which printed its own so-called gold-backed notes and lent them to the government at interest. Many more notes could be issued than the bank had in gold, using the fractional reserve system. The ruse worked to get the new U.S. economy on its feet, but the result was the system of privately issued money that we have today. Thomas Jefferson tried valiantly to sound the alarm. He wrote, "Although we have so foolishly allowed the field of circulating medium to be filched from us by private individuals, I think we may recover it. The states should be asked to transfer the right of issuing paper money to Congress in perpetuity. I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which dare already to challenge our government to a trial of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country." The last president to eliminate the federal deficit to private banks was Andrew Jackson, who shut down the second U.S. bank. Shortly thereafter, an attempt on Jackson's life failed. President Lincoln avoided a crippling war debt by issuing U.S. notes from the Treasury, rather than borrowing at the interest rates of 24 to 36% offered by Wall Street. Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, during an interview in 1876 said, "I know of absolute certainty that the division of the United States into federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War by the high financial powers of Europe. They understood at once that the United States would escape their grip. The death of Lincoln was resolved on." The last president to be assassinated was John F. Kennedy, who signed Executive Order 11,110, authorizing the Secretary of the Treasury to issue U.S. Treasury silver certificates. Following Kennedy's assassination, one of Lyndon Johnson's first official acts after expanding U.S. involvement in Vietnam was to replace government-issued United States notes with Federal Reserve notes, and to declare that Federal Reserve notes could no longer be redeemed in silver. Just as in the days of the Boston Tea Party, we are now in the throes of a credit crisis caused by a premeditated contraction in the money supply. Nearly all states today face budget shortfalls. The situation has gotten so surreal that it might take an outsider to appreciate the level of absurdity we've reached. Aliens observing our cities might be stunned to see masses of idle unemployed, enormous amounts of work to be done, and the only thing that is holding us all back is a lack of money. According to conventional thinking, there is nothing that can be done except wait for the big banks to provide the money and/or credit again. But what if there were another option? One state shows there is another way to prosperity. States cannot issue bills of credit, but they can own a bank. That means they can create their own credit, like private banks and the colonial banks. Only one state actually does this, North Dakota. It is also the only state that now has a budget surplus and is adding jobs. In a comparison of state unemployment rates versus mortgage delinquencies, including foreclosures for the first quarter of 2010, North Dakota is clearly in the best shape of any state in the Union. Consider California, which is now teetering on insolvency. It has projected revenues for fiscal year 2009 and 10 of $89 billion, $17 billion in deposits, mostly in Wall Street banks, funds stashed in an investment pool managed by the treasurer of $70 billion. The California Public Employees Retirement Fund has total investments of $360 billion, including nearly $144 billion in equity securities and $37 billion in private equity. This money cannot be spent, but it can be invested, as it is now. If only $8 billion of this pooled money were invested in equity for a state bank, the funds could back a potential loan portfolio of $100 billion. We have a choice. We can sit idly by and hope that the state's budget crises will go away, or we can take proactive steps to build solutions that work. Public banking is a proven solution that is just waiting for our decisive action. During the 2010 election campaign, a growing number of gubernatorial and legislative candidates supported state banking, and a few made state-owned banks part of their platform. As recovery from the collapse of 2008 stalls, legislators and grassroots organizations are drafting bills and gathering support for state-owned banks as a potential solution to their budget crises. The real Tea Party begins here. Reclaim your state's and your nation's sovereignty by supporting public banking. The time for action is now. Here's what you can do to support public banking in your state or city. Educate yourself. Start with www.public-banking.com. Read The Web of Debt by Ellen Brown. Join the Public Banking e-group to find others in your region to collaborate with. Work to start a public bank in your state or city.